Paddock. Glad you can all make it. We'll give you a quick tour of everything we have here. Wait for the Cobras to go by. We'll also wait for the American muscle cars to go by because I don't have a voice. But we'll start here with the M8 GTE. This is the Rolex 24 Daytona winner in 2020. It was John's car, and well, it still is John's car.
Until you sell it.
Yes. So that's a good point. This is the first time we're selling off a factory race car. This car has a lot of history to it. It won the Daytona in its first race. It podiumed a few times. You probably remember which ones, I don't. Yeah. And it won the Michelin Endurance Challenge, which is the 4 endurance races, so Daytona, Sebring, 12 hours of Sebring, 6 hours of McLaren, and the 1,000 kilometers of Petit Le Mans. So it won that championship. They finished second in the drivers,
overall, yeah.
And second in team, second in manufacturer. So it was it's an important car in the history of BMW, and yeah, and it's being offered for sale. We have the hoods off this and the CSL that you'll see a little bit later, just so you get an idea of what 50 years of progress looks like. So this is a flat plane V8 reverse flow twin turbo engine, max horsepower somewhere around 600. The way it's spec'd for IMSA, the engine has capabilities for much more. And it has an incredible life cycle as well. The engine can do multiple long-distance races without having to be rebuilt. So it's really a solid piece. It's closely based on the street engine, but it is a P motor. So a P motor is a proper motorsport motor. The street engines are S engines, right? And so, yeah, that's this one. And you can see the plumbing for the intercoolers. One of the differences between the street and the race engine is we use air-to-air intercoolers on the M8. On the street, it's an air-to-oil intercooler. You want to talk about it a little bit, driving it?
Yeah, sure. So, as Tom said, this was my car. I'm in my 10th year with BMW, and until this year, all of those years were in the GTLN class, which was factory efforts, the best of the best cars, you know, racing against some of the best drivers from all the other brands. And this car we won Daytona with, that race was intense, I would say. Our sister car had a problem early in the race, so it was just one car from us that was still in contention, and the Porsches had 2, so they had the ability to go off strategy, try things to try to
help you guys, right?
Well, they had the ability to, yeah, they had the ability to just take risks with one car and run the other car on the standard strategy. So I'll never forget the stint I did in the morning. I was the second to last driver in the car. Jesse finished the race, but I drove from I think roughly like 7 a.m. until around 10 a.m. And Daytona is one of the least physical tracks we go to, so doing those 2-3 hour stints are normally not a big deal. But the weight of that race, when you're flat out, and I mean, I did a restart past the Porsche. Halfway through the stint, I had tire deg, and he went back past. We had to change compounds because of that. So there was so much going on, and I remember getting out of the car and just feeling like that was it. I had nothing else left to give. You know, it was there was one that really takes it out of you, and Jesse obviously brought it home. Still in a battle with the Porsches to the end, but that's one I'll definitely never forget. So, sadly, this is the one they're selling.
We're going to make sure it goes to a good home.
I was looking forward to seeing it at these events, and in 20 years. But yeah, hopefully it goes to a good home, and obviously it's a valuable car. And I think one of the coolest things I think about BMW is when you go down the line here is that they value the history, but they don't just value it by putting it in a museum. We're here racing some of the coolest cars that BMW has made over the years, and yeah, hopefully this will become one of them in another 20 years. So the car comes with a trophy.
Yes.
But you're gonna have to get a couple extra zeros to get the watch.
Oh.
before we move on to the next one, Connor, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Connor D. Phillippi. I've been with BMW for 5 years now. Similar to John, I've always been in the GTE category. This is our first year in the GT3 class. John and I are teammates this season. Typically we have a 2-car effort. This year is our first year having a single-car effort as we transition to the GTP category next year, so which I believe will go back to 2 cars here in IMSA. But yeah, my first program with BMW was this one here, so this was a special one for me since I was kind of part of it from the beginning. One of my kind of initial tests with BMW before I signed was actually driving the test wheel car over in Barcelona before it had developed this far along. So it was pretty early days, and there was a lot of, with it being a flat paint crank, there was a lot of vibrations I remember from the beginning, and my first test I did with them, I was like, holy smokes, this car has a lot of work to get done, but in the end we made it all work, and won 24 Daytona twice with this car, not this particular one, but with the M8 GTE car.
Connor won it in 19.
John won it 20. Should have had 2 wins at Sebring. Unfortunately, we have got taken out with 10 minutes to go with another slower class car. Decided to miss his break point, but not salty about that at all. Yeah, so glad we can share it now. Obviously, it's a unique opportunity to buy a piece of history, but thankfully we still have a couple others that we'll keep in hand that John and I can drive in the future.
Yeah, we are keeping 2 runners and 1 show car. So that means we have the capability of selling off 2 cars. This is the most valuable of the 2 for sure. It has the best racing history. So we'll see. But right now, only 1 car is available, and it's this one. And yeah. And by the way, it is a really, I mean, these guys have won with it. For an amateur to drive it, it also is really fun. It's fantastic. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next one. We have the first car that was a true M car. It had the M badge on it, the M1. This car was designed specifically for racing first, and they had to make a street car in order to homologate it. So, whereas the first homologation car, the CSL that we'll talk about later, was a street car that Joachim Nerposch and the Motorsport team had to figure out how to make it into a competitive race car. They tell me that it was twice as much money to develop that into a race car as it was to develop this from a race car into a street car. So that gives you an idea of how much development there was here. So the M1 came out in 1979. It was introduced. This is a 1980. It was used for, it was actually the backup car for the BMW North America program for endurance races only. So it raced at Daytona and Sebring and so on. For the short races, we used something called an M1C, which was a prototype car, very fragile, very weird looking, incredibly fast, but also very fragile. So it would do the sprint races as we tried to develop it, and this was used for the long distance races. The M1C had the same engine at first, but it truly wasn't competitive against the American V8s and some of the other prototypes, so it eventually went to a 4-cylinder turbo. But this particular car then is not a pro car. So a lot of people think it's a pro car. It's actually painted like a pro car, but it's wider than a pro car, especially at the rear. The track's a little wider, and it has the fast fueling on the sides for endurance racing. Pro cars were short races. They used the stock street fuel tanks. So there you go on this. This will be out on track early this afternoon, about 1:15 or so. Hopefully, this time we can finish the session with it. But it has had its engine rebuilt. This is its first outing since the engine rebuild. We've had some teething issues with it. Got a few good laps in yesterday before it had an issue, but today we should be good. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
You didn't mention who's driving it.
Oh, some guy.
Some guy.
Some guy's driving it. Doesn't matter. Time some more and think back to the M8 you saw and look at this. I mean, there's a lot of difference here between those two. They drive very differently as well.
Where are all the sensors?
Yeah, no sensors. No sensors, no downforce. H-pattern gearbox. It's not the best. But it was a very, very successful car back in its day. So this is one of the 5 that raced in IMSA. It is not the Sebring winner. It looks like the Sebring winner, but I think that might even say it is. For many, many years, it was thought that this was the Sebring winner because it's the lowest serial number of the cars, and so it should have been the first car that was raced. It's the lowest serial number because it was the last car built in the race series. So the serial numbers for the race cars went from 999 downwards, and the street cars that were used to homologate went upwards. So for many years it was all confused. About 5 years ago, we went through the history with the guys who built these cars originally, lots of research, and we determined that this car raced the first race at Riverside mid-season. But a very important car, but it's the most original Group 4 around. A lot of the cars, all the other cars were converted to Group 5 with a big rear wing and a big scoop in the front to race the following seasons. This one was retired at the end of '75, so it stayed as a Group 4. So it's really an interesting car that way. Fun car. Unfortunately, we won't see it on track. It broke the other day, so we have to park it. Great car, about 430 horsepower, inline 6, 3.5 liter. Sounds great, fun to drive, great visibility everywhere. Kind of the opposite of that car for visibility. Yeah, any questions on this one? Okay.
I think the coolest story about this car, talking about the 50 years of development and the debate, is that when this car won Sebring, or I guess the sister car won Sebring, one car had to go out go fast so that the Porsches would chase us. And then that car, the BMW, and both Porsches broke so that the sister CSL could win. And that just, I think, to me, highlights what a different thing we're in. You talk about the motor on the M8, you do multiple endurance races, you talk about 24-hour, 12-hour races, and just keep running just fine, and then you could, if you were allowed, you could still turn it up and make more power, whereas back in the day, these things were just trying to make the end of a 12-hour race, So I think
one missed gear shift and it was over for it, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was like that. I think the spec on your car was that you spent 14 minutes in the pits over 24 hours, something in that range. So there's one brake pad and brake disc change in there, which takes about 2 minutes and a half. Yeah. And then other than that, it was just fueling stops every time.
35-second fuel. Boom. You're done.
Yeah. So 14 minutes. And if you have any issues with your car, you pretty much don't have a hope.
I mean, it's crazy because even when I started, and I don't think I'm that old, but apparently I'm on my way, because when I started endurance racing in the Grand Am days, you could fall laps down, even up to 10 laps down, and you'd get those laps back and come back, because a lot of other cars would have problems. There were so many yellows, and it was pretty easy to get your laps back under safety cars those days. So now, if you fall 10 laps, you might be able, if you fall 5 laps at the beginning, you might have a chance to get those back and
maybe,
the yellows and stuff if you time it right. But 10 to 15 laps now, your race is done.
Yeah.
And back in these days, you'd have a problem and they'd be crashing to fix it because every car might have a problem, and you could actually win the race despite being in the pits for an hour.
Yeah. At the end of the race at Sebring, Redmond says that he had the alternator belt had come off, so he had no alternator. He was running off the battery, and so he had to shut the lights off at Sebring in order to get around. I mean, it was ideal. And he would turn them on just past the start-finish line so that they didn't black flag him. And he finished the last half hour.
The only place that was actually lit up.
Yeah.
He would drive behind the lights on.
I don't know how well it was lit back in those days, but whatever. But yeah, it's different days. And they did Daytona with 2 drivers, Sebring with 2 drivers. You do Daytona with 4 drivers, and Sebring with 3. Yeah. Let's go on to the next one. There's a question about, is that close to production engine? No, it's not. It's a real race engine. It's based on the 3.5 liter street engine, but it's very well developed. It's called an M49. Very rare. That is an M49 in there. And the next generation was the M88, which powered the M1 and some of the M6s and M5s and things. So by today's standards, it's not that developed, but back in the day, I mean, it was 430 horsepower out of a 3.5 liter, so that was significant.
Had a Euro M6
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. All right. So probably don't need to introduce this car too much, but this is a McLaren F1 GTR. It's chassis number 17R, of 28 chassis ever built of GTRs. It is a BMW V12. You may be asking, you don't know McLarens. You may be asking, why is McLaren in the BMW stand? That's our engine in it. So it's powered by BMW. It says so on the door. It's a 6-liter V12, and it's basically two E36 M3 engines put together. So the heads are the same as the European E36 M3. This is the race version, so 600 horse. The street car version had 630 up to 2 or something like that. So it's actually restricted for a race. The McLaren F1 won Le Mans outright overall in '95. The car that has Clinic written on the side. McLaren was not, actually Gordon Murray, who designed the car, was not keen on having the car go race, but in the end they helped Clinic set it up so that they could race, and they won overall. The following year, BMW Motorsport wanted to go back to Le Mans and win for BMW as well. So there were 2 cars. They planned to go with the 2-car teams. BMW Motorsport approached BMW North America and said, "Do you guys sponsor?" We said yes. So that's why we have the American flag on the back of this car. The sister car, chassis 16R, has the English jack and the French flag on the back of the car. The 2-car team went for Le Mans. The sister car did, I think, 4th overall. Ours came 8th because it had a punctured radiator and had to spend time in pits. It did 3 races in its career. 2 were Le Mans qualifiers. One is Silverstone, 4 hours at Silverstone in '96, and then a Le Mans qualifier at Le Mans itself. If you go on YouTube, you can see Steve Soper driving this car, in-car camera, from Silverstone, actually. So, pretty neat stuff. He didn't race. Yeah, he didn't race an hour car for Le Mans, but he raced it at Silverstone. So, look for it. The sound is incredible. It really is incredible. So, John is driving this car this weekend. I'll let him tell you about it. Hey, John. Tell him what it's like to drive this car.
Well, I was just asked if I've been leaning on it a little harder as the week's gone on. And
the right answer.
My answer is always that I hear Tom's voice while I'm driving all the time. So, yeah, I did get a little racy yesterday with a couple of prototypes, but yeah, definitely trying to drive a little more conservative than would normally drive. But I mean, this thing is really special. I think if you go watch it, it's obviously cool just from seeing it and knowing nothing about motorsport. I think the sound, the look, and the way it handles is amazing. But obviously, when you add in the history that Tom just spoke about, for me personally, it's pretty, I used to, as a kid, people would ask, what's your dream car? And I always thought the center seat McLaren was so cool as a kid. So now, 20 years later, 30 years later, I get to kind of make my dreams come true and drive one on the track. So I'm still unsure why I got this honor, why Tom felt that he could put his trust in me for this, but I'm very honored to step into this car each day this week. And yeah, it's been a really fun one, and I keep fighting the urge to drive it flat out, but we'll basically, when you talk about driving, I mean, we're still pushing these things and sliding around and driving them pretty hard. We're just a little more conservative in the brake zones, and certainly when it comes to driving around other cars, you're not making passes that you would normally make in an IMSA race. So I got stuck behind a prototype for probably 3 or 4 laps yesterday that in an IMSA race I would have just gone by, because you're willing to take that risk in your day job, but not when you can't afford or can't even find the parts to replace if you mess it up. So Tom tried to get me to sign something saying if I break it, I buy it, but I figured I would just declare bankruptcy and move on if that happens. So
it's a more difficult car to drive as a race car because it has a full synchro H pattern gearbox like the street car. So he's got a heel toe, downshift, and do all that stuff. No clutch gearing. I mean, you've got to.
It's really been fun because you know, I mean, obviously technology. We were talking about earlier that over 50 years, technology's come a long way. But I think, you know, there's a reason we run turbos. There's a reason, you know, there's a reason we run paddle shifts. I mean, all of this stuff is faster and it's more reliable. But when you drive something like this, it sort of reminds you why you fell in love with motorsport as a kid, you know. So that's why it's cool to come do this event and see the history, and it's still running, you know, because it's a fun time. And actually, David just showed me from his GoPro the angle. You can see the H pattern and the footwork, so it's a really cool angle. So check out my Instagram tomorrow. I'll be posting some of the videos from the race today because he's gonna get that angle again today. And yeah, Jay Edwards Racing. So check it out.
Any questions on this one? The last one here is it's called the V12 LMR. So this was 96. This was 99.
Yeah,
very similar time frame. This is LMR. Well, this one is a Sebring winner. 12 hours of Sebring overall winner. Sister car won the 24 hours of Le Mans. Let's see. Similarities between these two, the engines are very similar. So this is also a V12. It has a different engine number, so it's further developed. We never did disclose exactly what was different, and we haven't had the engines apart. They're pretty durable, actually, so we don't take them apart. The only thing we know is that they both have titanium crankshafts in them, which makes them really free revving.
Oh yeah.
So this car raced for 2 seasons, 99 and 2000. There were 5 chassis total. There are now 4 because our friend Bill Oberlin had a slight mishap with one of them, and that car's no longer with us. Thankfully, Bill wasn't hurt in that crash, but the car was destroyed. So we have one. There is one in Munich that is the Le Mans winner, and it has another headlight in the binnacle there. And then there's a Jenny Holzer art car that we also have in the collection. And then there is one in private collection now. Let's see, what else can I tell you about it? Very successful car, never DNF'd except the one Bill DNF'd, and was very successful around the world. And Connor, what's it like to drive it?
Well, yesterday was our first race of the weekend. We won, so it was a good start. Obviously, I naturally like it because of that. But no, as you said, it's just a really raw race car. There's no assist, there's no traction control, no ABS. It's still nice to go back to a sequential shift again, having to do a little bit of pedal work, which is pretty cool. As they mentioned on the engine side, it's very responsive throttle response-wise, and how the engine revs up, it's like instantaneous, which isn't really typical of the GT cars we race these days. So it's pretty cool to get your hands on this car. One thing that I think was unique about this car was the power steering for that era, but also the way it is now. The first time I drove it, I thought it was going to be quite heavy to turn the car, but it was surprisingly light and actually very comfortable and easy to drive. And yeah, everything else is pretty sweet and simple, which is kind of what you like. It's kind of the opposite of the contrary of what we have these days. Everything's quite complicated, and we have 40-page manuals on how to use a steering wheel and all that stuff. So
and that's no joke. That's no joke.
It's nice to have about 5 buttons and you know, some work, some
Why
don't.
is the driving position offset and not center line?
The rules stipulated you had to have room for a passenger seat. So there were the weird Le Mans rules back in the day. There were a few things that we kind of interpreted the rules differently than others, and which made this car more competitive. Every other car had a roll hook that went over both seat positions, and that added drag. We read the rule and we prevailed that it only needed to be behind the driver. So yeah, so that changed that. We were also protested by air going in the car different ways, but we prevailed there as well, and the car race was successful. I want to go back to the sequential shifter thing a little bit. So, street car, H pattern, right, with synchro, so you have to use the clutch every time. We've had, in their history, we've had H pattern crash boxes, so once you're rolling, you don't use the clutch anymore. You just lift and you can shift to the next gear. When you downshift, you have to blip and it'll go in. This one is still full synchro like a street car. The following year, it went to a sequential. There are two types of sequentials. There's an electronic assist version, which will blip the throttles and do all that for you. Our Joy car, the E92 M3, was like that. You had to keep your hand off of it because if you touched it, it thought you wanted to shift, and so it would start preloading things. So hands on the wheel, and this was critical because you break gears, and then you just bang it down a few gears or shift up. But it did all of the rev matching for you. This car, he's got to do all his rev matching. So it's in between step, but very effective. It's like a motor. If you're familiar with a motorcycle, it's like that. So first neutral first, and then boom, boom, boom. Yeah, except that's reverse.